It's got a lot against it, as we've discussed. There are lots of reasons why it might not happen. It is a lot more substantial, though, than him coming up with, there's going to be a Riviera in Gaza a few months ago. This is something that seems to have the backing international of Arab states, very importantly, and of Israel and of European states, that probably the vast majority of American leaders can agree on. That the vast majority of Palestinians would probably agree on, except for Hamas. So, there is all of that. It is an actual substantial plan. It is far too early to talk of eternal peace or the most important moment in the history of human civilization. But I think we've got used to the idea. President Trump does tend to exaggerate.
Let's talk about this peace in the Middle East. No doubt Donald Trump is thinking big. He says his 20-point plan could bring eternal peace in the Middle East, and he has Tony Blair on board to help him achieve his dream. William, we're so interested in your thoughts on this with your former foreign secretary hat on. I've got to admit, when I read the story, I'm deeply sceptical. Why would Netanyahu agree to a Palestinian state, even a long way down the line, that he fundamentally cannot see happen because his right-wing coalition wouldn't allow him to stay in power if that was the case? And why would Hamas walk away when they're simply being asked to lay down their weapons and surrender?
Well, that is where the last point there is really the biggest problem here, that this amounts to, this would entail Hamas giving up its weapons and not running Gaza at all, which it has been doing for the last 20 years. So it is still hard to imagine them doing that. That's the big obstacle that this plan would have to overcome. It would be a very good thing if they did that, because the people of Gaza would be able to move on from Hamas and probably have a much more prosperous and peaceful future than anything that's been on offer in recent years. So it is a good plan, but getting Hamas into it is going to be difficult. Why is Netanyahu going along with it? Well, it doesn't bring about, at the moment, a Palestinian state, but it is something that President Trump wants, that the United States is behind, and really that matters a lot to Israel. Israel has been able to get away with a lot, like the attack on Hamas leaders in Doha a few weeks ago, but it needs the backing of the United States. And here is Trump saying, this is what I want to do. So that has, I think, brought Netanyahu into line. So Hamas remains the big obstacle to this. It's a good plan. It's maybe the best thing that Trump has come up with in foreign affairs in all the different initiatives of recent months, I would say. But it's still going to be very, very difficult to do it.
And does it not lead to a Palestinian state? Because I can't quite understand what it leads to if it's not that in the end.
Well, it ought to lead to a Palestinian state, but there've been many obstacles along the way. This whole system in Gaza would have to work. Then the committee that would sit under this board of peace that would be chaired by President Trump, on which Tony Blair would sit. That would have to really function, and Gaza would really have to, perform well enough to be a stable place without terrorism getting in there in the future. All these things would have to happen before you really get what you would call a Palestinian state. So hopefully it would lead to that. But there'd be a lot of obstacles in the way.
Tony Blair, Kezia, interesting figure in all of this. As soon as you mention his name, hugely divisive figure. I remember I used to do a phone-in show, and you almost couldn't do a phone-in on Tony Blair because you'd just have an outpouring of hatred towards him. Very strikingly, I thought. People were very sceptical and suspicious of his motivations when it comes to geopolitics. Is he a figure that could help here, though, do you think?
So the other side of that, Stig, is that Tony Blair remains the most popular Prime Minister this country ever had. So I think there's a mixed perspective on his standing. And I think Wes Streeting nailed it completely in his clip with you earlier. The first thing people regrettably think when they hear the words Tony Blair is Iraq, and therefore they're very alive and their feathers are up at the idea that he might be the person to secure peace in this set of circumstances. And then you read on and remember that he has been a UN envoy in the Middle East for the best part of 2 decades, and with that comes a tremendous number of relationships that other people simply don't have. And you would want that type of experience and that voice around the table if this plan had any chance of succeeding. You know, I struggle to call it a plan because I read it and it feels more like a ransom note than a plan, because essentially if Hamas don't agree to this, it's carte blanche, absolute carte blanche to Israel to destroy what's left of Gaza. So
they have that anyway. I mean, I understand the point you're making, but I've put that to a US debate earlier in the programme, which is what more... I mean, America already give the military support to Israel. Israel looks like it's already doing what it wants to do with that support. I mean, does it really change anything?
I think it removes the suggestion that, you know, America could respond in anger in the aftermath of the next horrific thing Israel does next, so to speak. But that's the tiny difference it would make.
William, just finally, is there a danger that we all want this to happen so much that we're just ignoring what's staring us blatantly in the face? That Donald Trump always says stuff like this. He had a plan for a Gaza Riviera, which and he retweeted a picture of him sitting on a beach with Benjamin Netanyahu on it, and he talked about eternal peace. But this is effectively saying to a bunch of murderous terrorists, can you just stop? To a guy who doesn't believe in a two-state solution, can you just go along with the process that takes us there? It just doesn't... None of this is real, is it? None of this is going to happen.
Well, it's got a lot against it, as we've discussed. There are lots of reasons why it might not happen. It is a lot more substantial, though, than that. Him coming up with, there's going to be a Riviera in Gaza a few months ago. This is something that seems to have the backing international of Arab states, very importantly, and of Israel and of European states. That probably the vast majority of American leaders can agree on. That the vast majority of Palestinians would probably agree on, except for Hamas. So, there is all of that. It is an actual substantial plan. It is far too early to talk of eternal peace or the most important moment in the history of human civilization. But I think we've got used to the idea. President Trump does tend to exaggerate. So it's far too early to say any of those things. But it is a plan.
But has he ever said anything, William? Which has then been true at the bottom of it all? We endlessly get these moments, and then you look beneath them and nothing happens. It's a puff of air.
Yeah, no, that is true. And that over Ukraine negotiations has absolutely been the case. All of that toing and froing and summits that went on through the whole of August, with Putin going to Alaska, European leaders going to Washington, that wasn't really about anything. There was no substance to it. It was about all that was happening was everybody was trying to keep Trump happy. This is a bit more than that. This is that if it went into for an actual structure would take place, there would be a different process in the Middle East. The odds might be against it, but it is more of a plan than anything that he had on Ukraine. So I think we should at least give some credit for that.